This is the city, West Allis, Wisconsin. It's a relatively small city just west of Milwaukee. There are two main thoroughfares around here. The first is Greenfield Avenue, where you can find the site of the Wisconsin State Fair. They make amazing cream puffs there. The other is Wisconsin Highway 100. Along this road, you can find pretty much everything needed for everyday life. Food, clothes, cars, hardware, and for people like me, video games. I carry a controller. It was Tuesday, March 6th. It was cold in West Allis. I was working the day watch from my apartment. My art is made by Yuki Goomba. My name is Kyuji. I had just received a Patreon donation which gave me my first milestone. And since I'm a man of my word, that meant that it was time to review a particular video game. When I was a young gamer in Green Bay, one of the first NES games I played was Mega Man 2. Ever since, I've been a fan of the franchise. I've seen it through its highs and its lows. In fact, ever since I started making gaming-related videos in 2011, it's been this series I've talked most about. Now, despite my love for Mega Man, or possibly because of it, one game in this series has haunted me for years. Mega Man X7, a game so hated that it's said to have effectively killed the X series. But when you take away its reputation and its legacy, just how bad is it really? Well, thanks to my friends and my supporters on Patreon, I found the motivation to play through this game again. And now, it was finally time to give Mega Man X7 a proper review.
But let's not kid ourselves. This game sucks, and it's time I told you why.
Probably the best place to start with this is talking about just what we're getting into. Mega Man X7 was the first original Mega Man game for the PlayStation 2, released in 2003, and was the first and only game in the X series to feature 3D gameplay. The game was developed by Capcom Productions Studio 3, which had developed the previous two X games. Also, in a similar fashion to X6, longtime series producer Keiji Inafune contributed very little to X7, only giving advice to the illustrators as to the design of the new character being added to the game. Already we're behind the times, considering that not only had original series been released that had been built from the ground up in 3D, but other popular series, including Mario and Sonic, had also long since made the jump to 3D. In fact, this wasn't even the first 3D Mega Man game. That would be Mega Man Legends for the PS1, which was designed with 3D gameplay in mind.
However, as we're about to find out, simply being behind the curve on transitioning to 3D is the least of the crimes on this game's rap sheet.
Now, considering that this is the 7th game in the X series, I won't go in depth about the lore of the series and talk about how it got to this point. Instead, I'll just give you the cliff notes about the kind of world we're dealing with. In the 22nd century, the world is populated by humans and advanced robots called reploids. The reploids were based on the design of Dr. Light's last creation, Mega Man X, or X for short, who was discovered by an archaeologist named Dr. Kane. Now, these reploids aren't perfect and carry the possibility of malfunction or turning maverick. The Maverick Hunters were formed to deal with these cases, and were originally led by a super advanced Reploid named Sigma. However, during an investigation of a Maverick who had attacked another unit, Sigma encountered and fought against Dr. Wily's last creation, that being Zero. Sigma ultimately defeated Zero by a stroke of luck, but not without consequences. While Zero somehow became less aggressive, Sigma became exposed to a mysterious virus, turned Maverick, and began leading Reploids in a revolt against humans, believing Reploid potential to be superior to humans. Sigma would eventually be defeated by X, but would be reborn repeatedly, only to be stopped by X and Zero each time.
Basically, Sigma's the equivalent of Castlevania's Dracula if he were a robot.
It was not by my hand that I'm once again given flesh.
X7 picks up after X's ending in X6, with Maverick incidents on the rise. In the midst of this crime wave, X becomes sick of the endless violence and just up and quits. With the Hunters effectively kneecapped in X's absence, a group of bounty hunters known as Red Alert rises to fill the void. However, one of their members, a young Reploid named Axel, decides, screw it, and runs away in hopes of joining the Hunters himself. As he runs away from Red Alert's pursuit, he runs into Zero, who's investigating the latest incident, and together they take down a giant scorpion. Later, Axel asks to become a hunter, but X refuses because, well, rampant pacifism. Just then, the Hunters are contacted by Red, the leader of Red Alert, who's none too happy about his baby bird fleeing the nest. And instead of simply asking or even demanding Axel's return, he challenges the Hunters to a face-off against Red Alert's bounty hunters with Axel as the prize. X sighs at yet another pointless battle, but Zero and Axel charge into the fray. X eventually does join the battle, but more on that later. Now here's my first big issue with the plot. The X series has always been darker than the classic series, and decidedly so. I mean, we've dealt with crap like a robot civil war, a falling space colony, and viral outbreaks aplenty. However, in this game, what we have here is basically a gang war. I don't know about you, but to me that feels like a huge step backwards in terms of the story. And if Red wants Axel back so badly, why does he skip straight to fighting instead of, oh, I don't know, demanding Axel's return? Oh wait, we do get an explanation for that.
Speaking of which, from here on out, it's spoilers, so if you don't want the rest of the details, skip to the timestamp here, okay? You good? Good.
As you defeat the members of Red Alert, the story is further fleshed out through text cutscenes. Turns out Axel was a huge asset to Red Alert because of his ability to use DNA data to copy the abilities and form of other reploids. But even he doesn't know how he got it, or where it even came from. Which is probably why Red just couldn't build another one. Turns out that Axel was being used by Red Alert for his ability, and he ran away after his old friends became more aggressive and even murderous. As it turns out, a mysterious figure, known to Red Alert as the Professor, took advantage of Red's disdain for the Hunters and showed him how to use the DNA data collected by Axel to make his mercenaries stronger. In exchange, however, he wants Axel's return and X's DNA data. You'll never guess who this mysterious figure is. Yep, after defeating the bounty hunters, storming Red Alert's base, and defeating Red, it's revealed that the Professor is none other than a revived Sigma. So the Hunters kick his ass, twice, Sigma somehow survives, Red shows up and knocks out X and Zero, but it's actually Axel who uses the ruse to blast Sigma in the face. Not gonna lie, that was clever. Later, Cygnus and Aelia think Axel has what it takes to be a hunter, but X refuses because, well, rampant pacifism. Come on, X, even after all that? Meanwhile, Zero has a nightmare about X becoming murder crazy, something that runs completely contrary to X's character. And here we have the other crime committed by X7's story, the treatment of its characters. The writing for these characters is one-dimensional, especially compared to previous games. This is most prominently seen in the Hunters. Axel, as a character and concept, is far from bad overall, and in X8 and Command Mission, his youthful and cocky personality was a good contrast to X and Zero. But to say his introduction was graceful is nothing short of delusional. I get what they were going for. He's a rookie, he's young, he's a runaway from a family that's changed beyond recognition, and the likes of X and Zero are legends to him. But the way he was written in X7 makes him look like just a little kid with Notice Me Senpai syndrome. Zero's always been a badass to be sure, but his character has been developed throughout the series, particularly in X4 and 5, with the emotional stress taking its toll on him more and more. In X7, though, he's nothing more than a shell-shocked veteran whom the writers, planners, tried way too hard to make look like a badass, but ended up making him a stereotype in the process. But X got the worst treatment by far. X's struggle with violence has always been there, but there was more depth to him than that, because even though he didn't want to fight, he knew that sometimes you can't protect peace without stopping those who spread war. X7, on the other hand, reduced him to a pussy-ass bitch who won't stop whining about violence. Even when he rejoins the battle, his dialogue with the bosses is just whine, whine, whine. Even side characters like Aelia, who had her backstory fleshed out in X6, had all that thrown out the fucking window. Writers need to respect their characters, but it's clear that these guys just didn't.
Maybe they should have hired actual writers to write this thing.
One of the things that made the X series stand out was its great presentation. The sprite work was simply excellent, and the levels just had a fine degree of visual polish. Unfortunately, the look of X7 is rather dull in comparison to the previous 6 games. The game tries to go for the cel-shaded look made popular by Wind Waker. However, one of the strengths of Wind Waker was how expressive the characters were. By contrast, the character models in X7 look like action figures with exactly the same amount of facial expression. The models themselves don't look too bad per se, but they can suffer from severe pixelization depending on camera distance. Let's compare this to Sly Cooper and the Thievius Raccoonus, which also uses cel shading and was released the year before. A lot more expression and a lot less pixelization. And as for the environments in X7, they're just boring. Most of the stages lack the pop of previous games. In the Super NES and PS1 era, the stages were hand-drawn and looked wonderful. They had style, they had coolness, they stood out. Only a few stages actually look like they stand out in X7, such as Zero's intro stage and Splash Warfly's stage. The rest either look generic as fuck, or in the case of Snipe Anteater stage, they look painful on sensitive eyes. I mean, we have generic forest level, generic fire level, generic cave base level, etc. Where's the style? Where's the uniqueness? Where's the stuff that makes me want to give a shit? This is the PlayStation 2, for God's sakes! The music isn't much better either. This is a far cry from the memorable tracks of the 16 and 32-bit eras. Come on, I'm sure most of you who remember the X series remember the likes of Storm Eagle's theme, for example. X7's soundtrack, on the other hand, just doesn't stick. A lot of it just feels like generic rock, and I struggle to remember most of the tracks in the game. Not all of them are bad, to be fair, but I only distinctly remember a few of them. Those belonging to a couple of the stage themes, the main boss theme, and the strangely creepy boss rush chamber theme. Seriously, that theme deadass gives me the shivers. The sound effects, I'll admit, are pretty good for the most part, except for the sound of footsteps. I mean, they sound like they're stepping in silly putty. Doesn't sound a thing like the sound of robot footsteps on metal or stone. But that doesn't even hold a candle to the voice acting. This is, no exaggeration, some of the worst voice acting I've ever heard in a video game. You can hear how bad it is simply from the dialogue, and a lot of it comes down to the voice direction. Now, recently in Anime Milwaukee, I went to a panel of voice actors who were involved with Final Fantasy, and one thing that came up was the importance of voice direction. You can bring together the best voices in the industry, but if the voice direction is bad, then the game will most likely sound like crap. Why do I bring this up? Because the voice direction in Mega Man X7 is absolutely abysmal. Many of the actors were either inexperienced, miscast, or just badly directed. Funny enough, one of the few good voices was Red, voiced by Barry Gierde. Know who else he voiced? Barry Jill Sandwich Burton. This is a veteran giving it his best shot, and if this is as good as it gets, then they definitely hired the wrong voice director.
Now, it's one thing for me to say how bad it is, but I think it's more fitting if I give you some examples. Now, if you care about your ears too much, feel free to mute the video. I'll give you an all clear when it's okay.
Why must reploids fight one another? I've had enough violence.
My friends in Red Alert are all really skilled reploids.
Okay, now as bad as the dialogue is, the in-game voice clips are even worse. You'll hear these guys talk every time you make a powerful attack, every time Alia has something to say, every time you switch players, take damage, or are close to the brink of death. And that's not even taking into account the boss battles. These guys spout the most annoying one-liners in any game in the series, non-stop, until you find yourself having to pause the game and reach for the mute button. By far the most infamous example is Flame Hyanard, who not only spouts said one-liners in the most grating voice imaginable, but has two clones who do the exact same thing. And every time a new clip begins, it interrupts the previous one, resulting in a tossed salad of ear-rupturing screeching. Don't believe me? Just watch.
Again, I'll give you an all clear when it's safe.
Burn to the ground! Burn! Burn, burn! Ground! Burn! Burn to the ground! Burn to the ground! Burn! Burn!
I sincerely apologize to everyone who didn't mute the video. Please don't sue me.
This isn't even cheesy bad like in Mega Man 8 or X4, where we could just laugh at how bad it is. In X7, it's not even funny. It's just painful. But at least it's safe to say that the actors themselves have gotten better. They would have had to if they're still getting work today.
Can I file charges against this game for noise pollution?
As I've talked about before, Mega Man X7 was an attempt to bring yet another franchise into 3D properly. Considering that it's a Mega Man game, it follows the formula of previous X games. After the intro stage, you have a choice of 8 missions which you can play through in any order. This time the Maverick lineup consists of Splash Warfly, Soldier Stone Kong, Snipe Antidor, Ride Borsky, Vanishing Gungaroo, Wind Crowring, Ear Cancer, and...
He's just an onion! He's just an onion! He's just an onion!
Stages are divided up into multiple sections, which, conveniently enough, you can start at the beginning of if you run out of lives, followed by a battle against the boss. Beat him, and you gain his powers, get a rating, and return. Once all 8 missions are completed, the final stages open up. As always, there are plenty of hidden items, such as sub-tanks to store reserve energy, heart tanks to increase your life meter, and an EX tank which boosts your initial lives to 5 instead of 3. Returning from X5 and 6 are the rescue of injured reploids. Simply touch one to rescue them. Doesn't make a lot of sense, but hey, it's better than an escort mission. There are a couple new things here. Stages consist of a mix of side-scrolling 2D and open 3D sections, for example. Also new to this game, you travel in teams of 2. Prior to starting a stage, you select a team of 2 hunters to enter the mission. Of course, that choice is moot for a good half of the game since, well, rampant pacifism. Zero can double jump, air dash, and reflect most projectiles with a well-timed saber slash. Axel has a rapid fire shot, can hover for a brief period, and has a special shot which needs to be charged, but if it lands the final blow on an enemy, you can get certain enemies' DNA cores, which allows Axel to transform into a copy of that enemy for a limited time. He also has a roll move, but when was that ever useful? Once you unlock X, he has to be unlocked by the way, he comes with his chargeable X-Buster, an air dash, and armor parts that you can find. Both X and Axel can lock onto enemies, and you can use the R2 button to switch nearby targets. You can switch between your team members whenever you have active control by pressing L2, which is important because if your current teammate dies, you lose a life regardless of how much health the other has.
Think of Tekken Tag Tournament instead of the Marvel vs. Capcom style of health management from X8.
In theory, this style of gameplay could work, but the gameplay is guilty of a laundry list of problems. Let's start with how slow and clunky the game feels. Previous X games felt fluid and fast, allowing you to proceed through levels at a good pace. X7, by contrast, feels like a slog through a pool full of mud, regardless of who you're playing as, or whether you're playing in 2D or 3D. Even dashing feels slower than usual. How is that even possible? I'd really like to know. Another issue that hurts the game's pacing is a little thing called hard knockdown. Normally in X games, you only suffer slight pushback from getting hit. However, in X7, some things can knock you flat on your back. Not only is this a pace killer, but if you're in the wrong place, it can literally kill you. Also, the lock-on system undermines the series' fundamentals in 2D sections. Mega Man's been a series about jumping and shooting. Jumping isn't just for the sake of getting over obstacles, but also to getting to the right height to defeat enemies. But with the lock-on system, you can just mash the attack button and usually you can kill everything in short order. It feels like that feature should have been restricted to the 3D sections. Unfortunately, said 3D sections feel even worse. First off, the 3D sections largely feel like they were designed with 2D level design in mind. Now this works for franchises like Crash Bandicoot, but Crash doesn't have a lot of shooting in it. Now the following point has been made by other reviewers, but it bears repeating. This philosophy of level design often reduces the shooting of enemies from necessary to simply optional. Granted, this could make for speedrun potential, but let's face it, why would you want to speedrun this?
It's like they tried so hard to make 3D work that they didn't have time to think about how to make Mega Man work in 3D.
And there are a couple of stages that reintroduce familiar mechanics, but as a result, they end up as crime scenes themselves. The first is Ride Borsky stage, which is a ride chaser level. Past ride chaser levels were fast-paced and demanded quick reflexes and split-second reactions. This stage? Well, you can accelerate, but the controls are so bad that it shouldn't even pass for street legal. And considering you're defusing bombs, the only reasonable way you'll complete your mission in time is to drive so slow you'd get a ticket for holding up traffic. Thankfully, this stage is mercifully short, only to end up with a boss battle with a crap ton of slowdown. Then there's Vanishing Gungaroo, which brings in ride armor. Remember the power rush that ride armor gave you in the past? Well, you won't find it here, because it's been robbed blind by bad mechanics. The blue armor is slow and clunky as fuck, and the red armor is melee only. And the main attraction for this thing is an arena battle where you take out a crap ton of enemy bots in a 3D chamber. Speaking of which, the camera is another accomplice. The way it's angled has your character way too close to the bottom of the screen, and the camera is always pointed downwards. The best 3D platformers have free camera control. In X7, the camera, when you can control it, will still interfere with you whenever it gets the goddamn chance. Now, in a 3D platformer, how would you expect to be able to control the camera? The prime suspect would be the right analog stick. But X7 commits the felony of assigning camera control to the R1 and L1 buttons, which you'd think would be used to switch weapons. Guess how you switch weapons? The right analog stick. Not only is this bass-ackwards, but this means that the camera can only move in two directions and the weapon switching is unassignable. Not that the special weapons will do you much good anyway. Most of them are very ineffective and don't have enough weapon energy to make them worthwhile. Even in boss fights, they don't do enough damage to be worth using since they have so much health. You're better off using your default weapons in most cases. Though I will give credit for one thing. Sometimes you get new base weapons for Axel and Zero, an idea they expanded upon in X8. As for the boss fights themselves, they tend to be either easy and tedious, or needlessly frustrating, with almost no middle ground. Flame Hyanard and Tornado Tunyon are cases of the former, because you can exploit Zero's techniques or the enemy's movement patterns. Three big examples of the latter are Snipe Anteater, who fills his arena with so much projectiles that you'll be trying hard just to survive. Red, who combines the 3D issues with small platforms, instant counterattacks, and other crap, and the final Sigma battle where the camera will wrestle with you at every turn. Meanwhile, each of the characters has their own issues. In Zero's case, it's his slow and sluggish combat. In X4 through 6, Zero's saber slashes were quick, crisp, and clean, and you knew where his attacks would hit because the saber arcs were well defined. But look at Zero's slashes in X7. They're markedly slower, and it's not always clear if the attack will actually hit anything. And besides, his melee combat makes him handicapped, especially against the likes of Red. Of course, Axel has issues of his own. If that roll move were his only issue, that wouldn't amount to anything. But then there's his copy shot. It does pathetic damage even compared to his pea shooter, and several enemies in the game are bullet sponges. And remember, that copy shot has to be the final blow in order to get the DNA core. So you either have to remember just how many shots it takes to bring an enemy down to the right health level, or guess and run the risk of killing the enemy. And it's not like they're useful for general navigation or combat. When you actually use A-Trans, it'll likely only be to locate reploids or items that are in locations that are otherwise impossible or unfair. Worst part? You can't even cancel the transformation early. You have to wait until the timer runs out. One more thing. In 2D sections, the enemy has to be in line with you or the core will drop out of reach.
To be perfectly honest, A-Trans sounds like it could have been used as a great stealth tool, so to see it so underutilized makes it a misdemeanor in itself.
Now there's one hunter left to profile. X. Now remember, X is absent when the game starts, mainly so that the game can push Axel as its newest protagonist.
I mean, he's featured on the back of the box, his face is on the disc, he's featured on the instruction booklet, so it's pretty clear that Capcom wanted Axel to be the star here. There's just one problem with that. This isn't Mega Man Axel. This is Mega Man X!
Now in order to sum up the main issue with X, I have to tie this into something else. Rescuing reploids. This was introduced in X5, but all that was at stake was health refills and extra lives. X6 took it a step further by having a fixed number of them, having some of them give you power-ups when rescued, and adding an element of risk by making them susceptible to the Nightmare virus. This was a pain to be sure, but X7 made things worse by giving reploids the fortitude of dried flowers. If any bullet so much as grazes their cheek, boom, dead, permanently. And unless you've played the game before or have a guide, you have no way of knowing which ones have power-ups, meaning if you don't approach one carefully and it's in a precarious position, you may lose out on a power-up. Now, permadeath works with games like roguelikes and, more prominently, games like Fire Emblem, which are designed with this mechanic in mind.
But unless Mega Man X7 is trying to commit identity theft, I don't think it's a roguelike or a Fire Emblem game.
So what then is the point of rescuing reploids? Well, besides the aforementioned power-ups, they're one of the keys to making X playable. Here's the thing. There are 16 reploids to rescue in each of the 8 missions. In order to unlock X, you need to rescue 64 reploids or beat all 8 bosses. That means, at minimum, you have to rescue all the reploids in 4 of the missions without a single one dying. And this is where the biggest issue with X comes in. By the time you unlock him, you're likely to have powered up both Zero and Axel to the point where X is in serious need of anchor arms. At this point, you'll likely need to take X into every stage from that point on to get him caught up. As for his armor, the glide armor is very lackluster. The head attracts nearby items, the body gives you the Giga attack, the arms let you charge special weapons and allow the excess of a charge shot to home in on enemies, and the legs let you glide. Yeah, the chest is powerful and the legs are useful in certain areas, but that's still only half the armor set that's actually good. What happened to the awesome armors of games past? The Flight of the Falcon armor, the charge shot and unlimited weapon energy of the 4th armor, the ninja power of the Shadow armor. Oh, and about those power-ups I mentioned earlier, it brings up another issue I have with this game. Aelia. Remember X5 when Aelia would interrupt you every 5 steps you took? Well, it's not quite as bad here, except when I answered her calls, I couldn't speed up the text scrolling. It's especially annoying on the results screen where you have to hear her explain power-ups every time you equip one, as well as every time you select an option on the results screen.
Do you want to retry the stage?
Yes, I want to retry.
Do you want to save?
Yes, I want to save. And it's not just Aelia. You can't skip the in-game cutscenes either, just the intermission ones, and, unless you have a bad copy like mine, the attract mode cutscene. Yes, I know it was my copy. One of my friends was able to skip it on his.
Would it be fair to call him lucky?
It's clear that Mega Man X7 fails to live up to the legacy established by its predecessors, despite its best efforts, and the fanbase tends to agree for good reason, made even more clear by how the backlash against the game effectively committed manslaughter on the sales of both X8 and Command Mission. But even on its own, ignoring what came before it and how it affected what came after it, X7 is still guilty of being a bad game. The game commits assault on the sensibilities of both 2D and 3D platforming, and murders the potential of 3D Mega Man with lackluster presentation, gross negligence of the series' characters, a bland story, and gameplay decisions that sabotage the quality of the game. I struggle to find positive qualities about this game, but in the end, nearly everything I managed to find was ideas. Of course, ideas and intentions are well and good, but it won't count for much if the execution fails. And that's what X7 ultimately is. A well-intentioned, but poorly executed mess of a game that's a crime against the franchise that spawned it.
I'm the Quarter Guy, and thank you so much to all my patrons for supporting my channel and helping me get this far. You've all been a big help. And now that I've made my case as to why I can't recommend this game to anyone, it's time I carried out the proper sentence on this piece of crap.
Mega Man X7, burn to the ground. So yeah, Mega Man X7 sucks. Hey, remember when I talked about what characters I wanted as Smash 4 DLC? Well, it turns out I was right. About one of them, out of 10, and about a couple years late, but hey, it still counts, right? I mean, I predicted Mega Man and Shulk, so I think I have some kind of precognitive abilities. Maybe I should try the stock market. Actually, no, considering the state things are in, I think it's too risky. Next time, top 10 characters I want in Smash Switch. It's game time!